There are things you don't realize the value of until someone tries to steal them from you. A glass of sweet tea on a sweltering summer afternoon. A quiet creek trickling through a ranch that's been in your family for 3 generations. Or simpler still, the right to say no on your own land. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a community activist. I'm just a tech engineer who once believed that water should be shared, until the day I discovered a hidden pipeline running beneath my property feeding over 300 homes, without a single person ever asking for my permission, and behind that pipeline, a HOA that believed everything was theirs, so long as they said it loud enough, long enough, and made enough money from it. I didn't choose this fight, but the moment they touched my land, my father's name, and our family's honor, I chose to end it. I never thought I'd return to my hometown. Not after all those years in Silicon Valley, surrounded by dashboards, air-conditioned offices, and Zoom meetings that felt like punishment. But when the call came from the hospital, everything changed. My father, John Carson, had collapsed from a heart attack while repairing the back gate. He died alone, with only the scorched Texas pasture and the wind howling through the old horse barn as witness. I came home that very night. The funeral was brief. Relatives, neighbors, the local, pastor, they all spoke of my father with reverence. But truthfully, I felt like an outsider. I had missed too much chasing technology. And now I was the sole heir to Carson Ranch. 15 acres of land, a quiet creek, and an old house built by my father's calloused hands. Your dad always said, "When you're ready, the land will wait," my mother Carol told me that, late afternoon. She poured 2 glasses of iced tea and handed me one as the sun turned the distant hills gold. I looked around. The old oaks whispered in the wind, distant cattle bellowed across the fields. I used to think I'd never come back. But in that moment I knew. I was staying. I took an extended leave, shut my laptop, and began to relearn life on the land that raised me. I learned to herd cattle, patch fences, and listen to the soil with my own hands. It was peaceful, rugged, and real in a way nothing virtual ever could be. Until that letter came, a white envelope, embossed with a golden logo. Clear Ridge Community Center. Invitation to new resident welcome event. I paused. Clear Ridge was the new suburban development built 5 years ago, sitting along the eastern border of our ranch. My father used to call them city folks who think cow smell is a biohazard. I nearly tossed the letter, but my mother said, "Go. Maybe they've changed. Maybe something new can begin." She always hoped. I put on my cleanest shirt, slipped on boots still dusty from the chicken coop, and drove the old Ford into Clear Ridge. The moment I stepped into the gleaming glass lobby, I felt out of place. Men in suits, women with blonde curls and sunglasses, indoors. And then she approached. "You must be Jake Carson," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that was soft but sharp as claws. "I'm Vivian Langston, president of the Clear Ridge Homeowners Association. Welcome to the community." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That handshake had no warmth. Vivian gave me a friendly tour around the neighborhood. After a few minutes of polite hellos, she pulled me aside to a corner overlooking the artificial lake, shimmering with lights that tried to hide the emptiness beneath. "Your ranch? It's rather rustic," she said, using rustic like an insult. "Some residents have expressed concerns about the overly rural aesthetic. It's affecting property values." I didn't even have time to respond before she added, "We'd like to propose a deal. A buyout of the entire Carson Ranch to expand our community amenities. A golf course, maybe a second lake, a spa complex." Then she quoted a price. 40% below market value. I chuckled coldly. "Not a chance," I said. "This ranch is in my family's blood. It's not for sale." Vivian's smile faltered. "Jake," she murmured, as if we were old friends. I'm just trying to keep things easy. We're neighbors, after all. You understand, right? A threat, as clear as day. I left the event immediately. When I told my mother, she just sighed and nodded. Your father dealt with their nonsense, too. Every year they'd send fines, threats of lawsuits, citing landscape violations. Even though we were never under their HOA, she handed me a thick folder. Inside were dozens of fake violations, leaving tractors in plain view, letting trees grow too tall, cow manure near the fence line. I flipped through them, rage rising in my chest. They think I'm dead so they can scare my son easier, my mother said, eyes staring out toward the hills. They're wrong. I sat down and opened my laptop, not to write code, but to call the first name on my list, Maggie Tran, the best real estate attorney in the region, and an old college friend from Texas A&M. I've lived my life by logic and data, but this isn't a math problem anymore. This is a front line. Maggie showed up at the ranch Monday morning, holding a cup of black coffee and a worn red notebook. As soon as she stepped out of the car, she looked around and said, I've never seen such blatant harassment, delivered with such well-styled hair. She examined every violation letter the HOA had sent my father, then slammed her notebook on the wooden kitchen table like it was a gavel. They have zero authority on this land. Carson Ranch is not under Clear Ridge HOA. It's all intimidation tactics. So what now? I asked. Maggie adjusted her glasses. Now we document every threat, every act of trespass. And if we need to, we'll make them wish they never crossed the line. I followed her advice. Installed cameras along the property boundary, updated GPS maps of the fence line, got ready for a Texas summer that was going to be hot for reasons. Beyond the weather, everything seemed to settle down, until one Tuesday morning. I was inspecting the southern fence line, the part bordering Clear Ridge, when I noticed something strange. Disturbed soil, fresh tire tracks, grass ripped up and not yet grown back. I knelt down. A section of thick industrial-grade plastic, pipe lay half exposed in the earth, a buried pipeline. I traced it. It ran along the fence line, crossed beneath my old oak tree, and disappeared toward Clear Ridge. I don't know how long I stood there, but when my phone buzzed in my pocket, I didn't hesitate. I called Maggie. They dug a water pipe through my land, I said, voice dry as dust. I need you here, now. 2 hours later, Maggie arrived with an emergency land surveyor she'd hired on short notice. The surveyor confirmed. The pipe lay entirely within the legal bounds of Carson Ranch. No permits, no written agreements, no evidence of an easement. They're pumping water from your creek, Maggie said, crouched near the willow where the intake was hidden, feeding it to Clear Ridge's artificial lake and irrigation system. My fists clenched. So not only are they stealing water, they're charging residents for what they call a water system upgrade. Exactly. She nodded. Didn't wait another minute. That afternoon, I drove straight to the Clear Ridge Community Center, demanded to see Vivian Langston. Of course, they made me wait nearly 40 minutes in the glass lobby like I was some clueless hillbilly who didn't know his place. When I finally stepped into her office, she was already smiling her victory smile. Jake, she purred. Finally changing your mind about selling? I tossed a stack of pipeline photos onto her desk, said nothing. Her smile faltered. What is this? She asked, trying to sound calm. I think you know. The pipeline your HOA ran through my land, stealing water from my property without a single permit. I spoke slowly, each word hitting like a hammer. Vivian's face changed in an instant. That's a misunderstanding. We have rights to access the water system under an agreement with your father. We have documentation. Show me. She handed me a copy of an agreement, dated 2 years ago, bearing the signature of John Carson. I looked at the signature. My heart dropped. Not out of fear, but fury. This is a forgery, I said, eyes locked on the page. I've seen my father's signature 100 times. This isn't it. Jake, I suggest you calm down, she said, her tone suddenly colder. If you want to open a legal fight, it'll cost you a lot of time, a lot of money, maybe even the land. Another threat, face to face. I stood up, voice steady. You have 48 hours to either provide legitimate documentation or dismantle the entire system. Otherwise, I'll sue for trespassing, water theft, and forgery of legal documents. I turned and walked out. Behind me, Vivian's voice echoed. You're making a mistake, Carson. Your father eventually learned how things work around here. You will too. I didn't look back, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. She'd just laid the last pipe that buried her own future. I walked out of Vivian's office with a fake calm. But truth was, my blood was boiling. Maggie said just one thing after I told her everything that happened. They just officially signed their name onto a criminal indictment. We moved immediately. To the next phase, gathering video evidence, I hired a team that specialized in installing high-grade security systems, the kind designed for ranches, with long-range vision, motion sensors, and camouflage that looked like bird nests or squirrel holes. We set them up along the fence, especially near where my creek intersected with the HOA's buried pipeline. They think I don't know, I muttered, watching the live feed from my iPad. Time to show them who really runs this land. 3 days later, right at 2 a.m., the system sent a motion alert. I opened the feed, a group of 3 people, hooded. One of them was clearly Brad Hampton, Clear Ridge's facilities manager, who once bragged about being a Marine but turned out to be nothing more than a county pool technician. They marched straight to the water intake, dug another trench, and installed a large piece of machinery. Looked like a high-capacity booster pump. And then I heard him say, crystal clear through the mic, "Yes, Ms. Langston, we're upgrading now. Capacity will be up by 30%. There was nothing left to question. The next morning, I sat down with Maggie and played the footage. She grinned, nodding like she was reading a millennia-old indictment. We're not just talking about trespassing and water theft. We've now got direct evidence of HOA leadership orchestrating it. This is more than enough to file for an injunction. We filed immediately with the local court and submitted a report to the County Water Resources Department. But while the wheels of justice were still warming up their printers, Vivian made her next move. She hit back with dirt and deception. Just days after filing, I started hearing rumors. I was in line buying groceries for Mom when Mrs. Finley, one of my dad's old church friends, leaned over and asked, "Jake, is it true you're turning the ranch into a crypto farm? Heard there'll be over 100 machines running day and night?" I blinked. Told her there was no truth to that. But it didn't stop there. At the barber shop, the owner whispered, "Jake, people say there's some waste management company planning to build on your land. That true?" Didn't take a genius to trace the source. Vivian Langston. Classic psychological warfare. Spread rumors, seed doubt, then play the savior. But worse was coming. One evening, my pickup's fuel tank had been drilled. Engine wouldn't start. The garage said there were signs of chemical sabotage. The next morning, my mailbox was smashed. By late afternoon, the words, "Sell the land," Hick were spray-painted in bright red across my front porch. My mother, Carol, stood beside me, not crying, not yelling. She just touched the wall, the one my father had built with his own bare hands. "Your father built this house with 10 fingers, she said, voice low but sharp as steel. Some bottle blonde playing sidewalk politics doesn't have the power to shake it. I called the local sheriff, Tom Miller, to report it all. He came out, wrote up a report, and scratched his head. I get it, Jake, but unless we get clear evidence, it's hard to pin anything, and, well, Clear Ridge does fund a lot of community projects." His eyes didn't meet mine when I stared back. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. A rough, hushed voice spoke. "Mr. Carson, this is Mark Holloway. I live in Clear Ridge." Can't give my name publicly, but the HOA's been charging us $300 a quarter for this water system upgrade, the one pulling from your land. People are starting to ask questions. I was about to ask more, but he hung up. Not a word extra, but that was all I needed. The HOA wasn't just trespassing and stealing water, they were scamming their own residents for profit. And now even people inside Clear Ridge were beginning to lose faith. I looked out toward the creek, the one that flowed quietly from the hills, deceptively peaceful. But I knew better. This war wasn't just about land or water. It was about truth, and I had the most dangerous weapon of all, a camera that doesn't lie. The war had gone beyond my ranch fence. The HOA was no longer just a bunch of arrogant neighbors. It now operated like a shadow government, with power, money, insiders in public offices, and a willingness to destroy anyone who dared stand up. I knew that if I wanted to defeat them, I couldn't just react. I had to get ahead of them. Maggie showed up the next morning with a look that said everything. "Jake," she said, slapping a thick file onto the kitchen table. "They're not just stealing water. They may be fabricating documents to legalize the entire system." I opened the folder. In the middle was a water usage agreement bearing my father's name, supposedly signed 2 years ago. That signature wasn't his. "This is a fake," I muttered. Maggie nodded. "They created this in case they got sued. This play is more professional than we thought." I didn't say a word. I stood up and stepped out onto the porch. The Texas sun was baking the land, but something hotter was burning in my chest, the fire to keep my father's name from being used as a shield for criminals. We regrouped at the strategy table. The solution was at the source. The small creek that ran through my land started from a cool spring deep in the hills. I remembered what Dad used to say. "The water is the soul of this land, Jake. Whoever controls the source controls the future." I checked with the County Water Resources Office, and as if fate had carved the path for me, the headwaters were up for public auction in 30 days. If I could buy the headwaters, I wouldn't just own the creek. I would control the entire water source the HOA had been siphoning from beneath my land. "We have to buy it," I told Maggie. But I knew Vivian would do everything to block us. If she found out I was in the bidding, she'd use every connection to outbid or shut me out. So I formed an LLC under Maggie's name, registered at her office address, and used it to quietly enter the auction for the water source. The starting price was $45,000 for a scrappy patch of land tucked behind a rocky hill, a lot no one cared about. But I knew, and soon they would too. That was the shut-off valve to the lifeline Clear Ridge had been leeching off. While we waited, I kept building our case. The cameras caught Brad Hampton and the HOA crew returning, this time in broad daylight. They were digging deeper, installing more pipe, this time armed with a community infrastructure improvement blueprint. I stepped out, recording from a distance. Brad spotted me and yelled, "Go back inside, Carson. This is community infrastructure. You have no idea who you're messing with." I replied calmly. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I've got it all on camera." That night, something else happened. My mom, always the calm one, broke down for the first time. She had just come back from the grocery store. Some Clear Ridge residents had cornered her in the aisle, screaming and calling her a selfish old woman ruining the community. I held her while she trembled. "They don't understand," she whispered. "But Vivian knows exactly what she's doing." That was when I realized this fight wasn't about land or water anymore. It was about the honor of my parents. 3 days later, I received the official confirmation of purchase. The headwaters, the very origin of Carson Creek, were now owned by my company. I didn't smile. I just looked toward the twinkling man-made lake of Clear Ridge and knew the rules of the game had just changed. I owned the headwaters. The shut-off valve was installed. All paperwork was in order. A flow monitoring system, certified by a state-level water engineer, was embedded neatly by the stream, like a honeycomb tucked into the rocky woods. Every pulse of power, every drop of water was now in my hands, and I only needed one thing, a legitimate reason to press the button. I'm not a man of blind vengeance. I wanted justice, not chaos. So I followed proper procedure. I sent a formal notice to the Clear Ridge HOA board demanding the following: immediate removal of all unauthorized pipelines, a renegotiation of water usage rights, fair, transparent, and at full market rate, a public apology for trespassing and harassment of my family. Hours. No response, and I would enact lawful protection of my resources. 3 days passed. No phone call, no email, just one thing arrived. A threatening letter from the HOA's attorney, Gregory Hoffman out of Austin, along with a forged copy of the water rights agreement. I didn't say another word. On day 4, under a brutal Texas sun at 103 degrees, I hit the button. Click. The valve shut tight. Carson Creek stopped flowing, like a severed artery. Day 1, Clear Ridge's man-made lake stopped spraying. Their sprinkler system was flatlined. The once lush lawns began to brown at the edges. Day 2, water pressure in homes dropped. Upstairs, bathrooms in some houses went dry. Residents started posting online. Day 3, local news showed up. Over 300. Clear Ridge households go dry during the heat wave. HOA blames hostile neighbor for cutting water. On the TV screen, Vivian Langston stood in a dried-up park, clutching a bottle of filtered water. This man decided to punish an entire community just because he didn't get his way. Children, the elderly, are suffering because he thinks he's some kind of water god. That night, my sister Jennifer launched her counterstrike. She released a full investigative video to 3 major news outlets, footage from my cameras showing Brad Hampton's unauthorized construction.ownership documents proving I legally held the water rights, and most importantly, the forged signature of my father on the so-called water agreement. A snippet from the video. This isn't about a man turning off a spigot. This is about an HOA stealing resources, charging its residents for it, and then pretending to be the victim. The post went viral. Over 300,000 shares in 12 hours. Comments exploded. People from other states started sharing their own HOA horror stories. Morning of day 4. My house was surrounded. Vivian Langston stood at the Carson Ranch gate, bullhorn in hand, backed by nearly 80 people, half furious, half confused. Turn. The water back on, Carson! You can't hold an entire community hostage! I stepped onto the porch. Jennifer's camera rolled. My voice stayed steady. I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm protecting resources that legally belong to my family. Vivian screamed back. You're destroying an entire community. I walked toward the fence, locked eyes with her. You illegally laid pipes, siphoned water off my land, then charged your residents for what you stole. And now you want water? Did you tell them about the forged contract with my father's fake signature? Someone in the crowd spoke up. Is that true, Vivian? Are we paying for stolen water? Vivian faltered. The crowd began murmuring. Sheriff Miller showed up. This time, no hesitation. Folks, disperse. This is private property. The city will handle this. As the crowd broke apart, I got a call. City Hall. We're inviting both parties to a hearing tomorrow morning. This is no longer a private matter. It's now a civic issue. That night, I sat with my mother and Jennifer. Glass of iced tea in hand, I looked toward the headwater valve, now guarded with a 24/7 surveillance system. My mother said quietly, but firmly, Your father would be proud, not because you turned the water off, but because you knew exactly when to do it. The next morning, I arrived at City Hall at exactly 8:45 a.m. with Maggie, my attorney, and my sister Jennifer. The limestone facade, cracked steps, and high-domed ceiling gave the place an air of justice, at least in theory. The mayor's chamber was a tall, echoing hall with dark wooden benches. On one side of the table, me, Maggie, and Dave Wilson, a representative from the County Water Resources Board. On the other, Vivian Langston, Richard Coleman, HOA Vice President, and Gregory Hoffman, the shifty attorney in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it came with built-in poison. Mayor Robert Hayes was the moderator. A political veteran, silver hair, booming voice, he'd weathered more political storms than Texas had twisters. We're facing a situation where 300 households are without water. During a summer heat wave, he began. We need solutions and answers. He turned to me first. Mr. Carson, can you confirm, do you own the headwaters currently supplying Clear Ridge? I nodded. I own the parcel containing the headwaters, legally purchased through public auction and transferred. In full. Under Texas state water law, I have priority rights to that water. Maggie slid copies of the deed and auction records across the table, undeniable. Hayes turned to Vivian. Ms. Langston, representing the Clear Ridge HOA, do you have documentation proving any legal right to that water? Vivian smiled like a rehearsed stage act. Mr. Mayor, our HOA had a long-standing agreement with Mr. John Carson, Jake's father, granting us access to the water system prior to his inheritance. She gestured to Hoffman, who pulled out. An old contract, the same one with the forged signature. I clenched my fist, but Maggie tapped my sleeve gently. She was ready. Mr. Mayor, Maggie said calmly, we have a video report from a forensic handwriting expert confirming the signature is a forgery, not matching any verified sample from Mr. John Carson. We also have a witness statement from a Clear Ridge resident who was instructed to help produce this document. The room fell silent. Mayor Hayes turned toward Vivian, tilting his head. Do you have a response to the allegation that this contract was falsified? Vivian swallowed hard, eyes darting toward Richard. He stared down at his notes, avoiding her gaze. Then the doors burst open. A woman entered, brown hair, holding a thick file. Behind her came over a dozen Clear Ridge residents, including Mark. Holloway and Lisa Thompson, a well-known local with a sharp tongue. Excuse the interruption, Mayor, Lisa began, but our community deserves to be heard. Hayes frowned slightly, then nodded. Lisa stepped forward and slammed the file onto the table. We've gathered 120 signatures from Clear Ridge residents demanding a full financial audit of the HOA. We've been paying over $300 a quarter this past year for so-called water system upgrades. Turns out we've been paying for water stolen from someone else's land. Maggie whispered to me. Now it's not just water theft, it's community-wide financial fraud. Gregory Hoffman stood up, trying to keep composure. This is nothing more than a smear campaign by a disgruntled landowner and a small group of malcontents. Jennifer, never one to miss an opportunity, held up her phone. I have video footage of Brad Hampton, HOA facilities manager, stating clearly that the pipeline upgrades were done under direct orders from Vivian Langston. What more do you need? Everything unraveled. The residents behind Lisa erupted into shouts, demanding answers, firing off accusations. The room echoed with gasps, curses, and disbelief. Vivian rose to her feet, losing all control. It's all lies. Jake Carson is a menace. He's the one causing this water crisis. We need to sue him, shut him down, whatever it takes. Richard. Coleman muttered, Vivian, sit down. You're making this look worse every second. Vivian snapped back. Shut up, Richard, you coward. Mayor Hayes banged his gavel 3 times to regain order. I am requesting the County District Attorney's Office open a full investigation into Clear Ridge HOA's financial practices, including the forgery allegation and unlawful land use. He turned to me. Mr. Carson, if possible, we ask that you temporarily restore water service while both sides work toward a legal resolution. I paused, then nodded. I'll restore flow for 6 hours a day, but there'll be no more free theft. As we walked out of City Hall, I glanced at Vivian, now a burnt-out flame flickering in the desert sun. Her eyes were blazing, but this time, everyone could see who was actually burning. 9 days. 9 days since the City Hall meeting. The Clear Ridge community had begun to wake up. Neighbors whispered to each other in cafes, grocery stores, parking lots. If Carson's telling the truth, then where did all that HOA money go? Lisa. Thompson, the resident who led the opposition, had been elected interim HOA president, while Vivian was suspended pending investigation. The illegal pipeline began being dismantled. Plans for a temporary water system were discussed. Transparent, legal, and, finally, mutually agreed upon. Everything seemed to be falling into place, and that, I should have known, was exactly when Vivian Langston would make sure to go down swinging. 1 week later, I received a letter from the State Department of Environmental Protection. Subject: an emergency investigation into alleged pollution of Carson Creek. Enclosed: an order to cease all use and discharge from the stream, citing lab results showing industrial solvents in the water. My heart sank. Not from fear, but because I immediately knew who was behind it. We immediately hired an independent testing company to collect samples from the headwaters and every stretch of the Carson stream running through my land. Jennifer, as usual, dug deeper than a geological drill. She discovered that the original sample collector behind the report was Thomas Green, a so-called independent inspector, a man who had mysteriously visited my ranch months ago after anonymous complaints, then disappeared. Turns out, Thomas had previously been disciplined for falsifying results at a real estate development in Austin. The connection? Thomas was a former employee of Langston Holdings, LLC, owned by Vivian's ex-husband. The dirty game just leveled up. 48 hours later, official lab results from a city-appointed team confirmed the headwaters were completely clean. Only one point showed chemical traces, the junction between Carson Creek and the illegal pipeline leading to Clear Ridge. Olivia, the environmental law attorney Maggie brought in, stood in my kitchen, holding the report. They didn't just lie. They dumped chemicals into your water to frame you. I didn't speak. I just turned to the Creek Junction camera footage. We rewound to that night. The moment of indictment. 3 hooded figures, one holding a plastic container, another lowering a hose, dumping straight into the stream. Zoom in. Profile, clear as day. Brad Hampton. I called Sheriff Miller. This time with irrefutable evidence. Within a day, a search warrant was signed. What did they find? At Thomas Green's office, draft fake reports, a receipt of $12,500 transferred from a HOA-linked account. At Vivian Langston's house, leftover chemicals, purchase receipts dated 3 days prior, and a one-way plane ticket to Cancun, Mexico. She was planning to flee, but she didn't make it. Vivian was arrested at the airport. Disheveled hair, dark sunglasses, hurried coat, no trace of the once powerful HOA president. Only a criminal stripped bare. List of charges: forgery of legal documents, community financial fraud, environmental contamination, conspiracy to sabotage, private property, and threatening public safety. Brad was arrested shortly after. Thomas Green is awaiting a federal hearing. And me? I returned to the water. The new water system, supervised by Lisa and a committee of residents, was installed by the book, openly negotiated, with fair access to Carson Creek's natural flow. I received a 6-figure compensation settlement from the former, HOA for unauthorized water use over 2 years, and I used most of that money to install a smart irrigation system, a biofiltration lake, and launch a water conservation education program for local school children. My mother, Carol, watched as I installed the sign reading Morgan Water Trail by the stream and said, "Your father always said land is where we belong, but you went further. You made it a place where others learn how to live right again." 1 year after I pressed the button that shut off Carson Creek, everything had changed. No more late-night banging on my door, no more lawsuit threats, no more anonymous calls asking if I was ready to negotiate. only the sound of water trickling, through nature, free and in its rightful place. Clear Ridge no longer looked like some wannabe Beverly Hills in the middle of Texas. It had transformed. Lisa Thompson was now officially elected as HOA president. Meetings were live-streamed, budgets audited by a third party, every dollar accounted for, down to the last cent. They even installed a community sign at the gate. Water is a shared resource and a shared responsibility. I pass it sometimes. I don't smile. I nod. Vivian Langston was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Brad and Thomas received probation and were permanently barred from practicing. Richard Coleman, the man who stayed silent while residents were deceived, took a plea deal. Jennifer, my sister, turned the whole saga into a documentary series, Blood in the Water, When HOAs Go Rogue. It aired on 3 major platforms, and surprisingly, was added to a law school curriculum as, for me, I never went back to Silicon Valley. Instead, I turned Carson Ranch into a natural resource conservation learning center. Kids now come to learn how to retain water, grow regenerative grasses, and understand that nothing is infinite. I partnered with Clear Ridge. Yes, the same folks who once hated me. Mike Holloway led a volunteer team. They repaired fences, installed water filtration, even built a wooden footbridge crossing the creek that once divided us. We named it the Reconciliation Bridge. One autumn afternoon, my mother sat on the porch swing, holding her glass of sweet tea, watching kids from both sides playing soccer under a glowing sunset. "Your father would be smiling," she said. I nodded. No words needed. The land had told its story. This story isn't about personal victory. It's not for bragging rights. It's a reminder. When unchecked power takes root, even something as simple as water can be weaponized. And it's a warning. Never underestimate a rancher, especially one with his hand on the shutoff valve. You could go your whole life ignoring water rights, land use clauses, or the shady nonsense behind HOA community engagement letters. But the moment someone lays a secret pipeline under your land, siphoning your resources and charging others to use what's yours, it stops being a neighborhood issue. It becomes a line in the sand, between right and wrong, between honor and exploitation, between silence and standing up, and sometimes, to teach that lesson. You don't have to yell, you just have to close the valve.